Hey, happy Friday. This week Apple announced a ton of stuff and then a million other important things also happened, so I won't have a very clear structure in my video like usual. I'll just go from top to bottom through all the tech news. Welcome to the Friday Checkout. Perhaps the most interesting non-Apple devices this week were Huawei's new Mate 50 phones. These are flagships with Snapdragon chips, but still no 5G or Google services due to US sanctions, of course, and the high-end models are ironically the ones featuring the notch, not a hole punch, which in this case makes space for extra sensors. Beside that, they also have a variable aperture, meaning little blades that open and close to switch between f1.4 and 4.0, kind of like what Samsung did a few years ago before they abandoned the concept. And there is XMage, Huawei's new camera brand that I still cannot pronounce. I mean, is it XMage? X-Image? Who knows? And finally, there's also satellite connectivity built into the phones as well, using the Chinese Beidou system for signal even when there are no cell towers around. This technically makes Huawei the first normal phone with satellite tech announced, though of course Apple also announced their own take on the tech as well, like a day later. And not to be outdone, Qualcomm and Google teased that they are bringing the feature to the rest of the Android ecosystem very soon too. Of course, the satellite tech is only for low bandwidth stuff and emergency use, for example, but given that everyone seems to be implementing it in one way or another, I guess it might become pretty common in a year or two. Another big launch this week was the Insta360 X3, which the company actually sent me a review unit of, and there are basically two major upgrades here. One, a way bigger screen, so you can actually see and set up what you're filming right on the camera, and two, bigger half-inch sensors that can each individually record in 4K now, as well as a faster processor for improved image quality. I love filming bike rides with these, and the company also sent me an affiliate link, so if you are interested in action cameras, this looks quite promising and you can check it out with the link in the description. In software news this week, Samsung has started releasing One UI 4.1.1 to Fold 3 and Flip 3 users, backporting all the fancy new features that came with Android 12L, like the taskbar for the new generation, to older ones. And what made me even happier is that they also committed to bringing the update all the way down to first generation Flip and Fold users as well. With the Fold especially, Samsung only sold a couple of thousands of units, many of which are probably not even in circulation anymore, so this definitely doesn't make any direct financial sense, but I love seeing Samsung doubling down on better software support even for niche devices. That's a really nice thing. In policy news this week, the US White House announced that if a company wants government funding from the $53 billion CHIPS Act, it will have to limit its business with China in exchange. Specifically, it can't develop leading-edge technologies in China or send latest technology overseas, and all of that for at least a decade after taking funds. Okay, and my final story is kind of non-techy, but I think it's really big news and I wanted to share it with you anyway. There is a new malaria vaccine which scientists are hoping might be world-changing. The vaccine, which was developed by researchers at Oxford, just passed a set of tests showing up to 80% protection from malaria. It is cheap to manufacture and it has a manufacturing deal for 100 million doses a year already, meaning that it has all the right ingredients to become a major game changer. This is apparently our second vaccine for malaria that comes not long after the previous one came out, and while it still has to go through more testing, it could help to stop the 400,000 deaths that occur from malaria every year, primarily in small children in Africa. I'm no doctor, so I have no idea how well this will go, but the scientists that are quoted in these articles say that there's a good chance that with all the progress that we've recently made, we might actually see an end to child death from malaria within our lifetimes, which would be a pretty significant achievement. But okay, I know you're here for the tech news, so let's move right back to Apple. By now you have probably heard that Apple has announced a bunch of new products, so I'll just give you a very quick summary and then some personal highlights and thoughts. Let's talk about the phones first. There are 4 new ones. The Mini was replaced by the 14 Plus, which will almost certainly be a bestseller as cheaper phones tend to do the best. And let's actually start with the prices, because contrary to what all the headlines are saying, the iPhones actually got cheaper. It doesn't feel like it, but they did. And to understand the rest of the iPhone, iPhone, we have to understand how. So in the US, Canada and China, the prices have basically remained the same, and everywhere else, like here in Europe, they have gone up. So how is this cheaper? Well, basically all the international price increases can be explained by foreign currencies like the euro and the Turkish lira massively losing value against the dollar, which Apple does their business in. Chinese and Canadian currencies have lost some of their value too, but not as much, so Apple seems to be willing to eat the extra cost in those markets. And meanwhile, the fact that US prices didn't increase despite heavy inflation at home means that in real terms, these phones, from Apple's perspective, actually got cheaper both at home and abroad. In other words, inflation and currency devaluation is kind of a bitch. Sorry, can I say that, boss? Yes, you can. Okay. Anyway, so we have to understand that from Apple's perspective, their margins are smaller. And I think this pressure partially explains why the cheaper iPhone 14 series actually uses last year's processor, not the A16, which Apple has never done except for with the kind of failed iPhone 5C. Now, the other reason for that decision is probably that the A16 isn't a major jump this year, with Apple completely avoiding any performance comparisons versus the A15. Leaked scores from Geekbench also don't show much of an improvement, and instead the new chip seems to be focusing on having a new display engine for powering the new always-on display efficiently, as well as a new image signal processor to handle the 48 megapixel camera sensor with its new pixel binning tech. These are both new features for iPhones and both are only available on the Pro models, so given that we don't expect any major performance improvements, Apple probably decided to just cheap out and use an A15 on the lower end models. Given Apple's performance lead, it's not a big deal anyway, and maybe the company will prove us wrong and the A16 will be a massive jump, we just don't know it yet, but it would be interesting to see if this was the year when their year-on-year performance gains actually stumbled for the first time. Beside chips, the other two features were of course that in some markets the iPhone will completely ditch the SIM tray, going for eSIM only, and here's a great meme from Alex Doby for that, plus the dynamic island of course that seems to have stolen the show. They once again managed to find a way to turn a bug into a feature that many people seem to like. Apple always finds a way to name things in very cool ways. I mean, like dynamic island sounds so exciting. Does that make a notch a static peninsula or something like that? Who knows? Anyway, they're really good at this. Now on the AirPods side, the biggest update is a new chip called the H2, which supposedly does twice as good a job at noise cancelling as the 3-year-old H1 before that. But on the watch front, we are again met with basically complete silence on high-end chips, so I guess we can assume that there's basically nothing new to be seen here either. Apple is usually super triumphant about their new chips, so this does feel strange this year, but either way, I'm actually really excited about the new watches. The normal models are just fine with minor upgrades, but the big deal is the new Ultra, which is this $800 outdoorsy watch made with titanium and sapphire crystal. It is bigger than a normal Apple Watch, it has a brighter screen, a bigger battery, better GPS, it has a bunch of extra sensors, and it is more durable, including the ability to scuba dive up to 40 to 100 meters, depending on the strength of the current. Now, I think I've never said this on the channel, but I actually do scuba diving somewhat regularly, and if the Apple Watch actually does what it says it will do, then that alone will be a huge deal. Now, for context, these are my dive computers, which are pretty typical, and yeah, you need one of these to track your depth and your air consumption and how quickly you can go up or down in the water, unless of course you want to die by having all of your tissues rupture, so almost every diver has one. As you can see, most of this device category is firmly stuck in the 90s. I mean, I need a special cable and a weird PC program to get any data off of any of these devices, and even these clunky models cost like $300 a pop. There are more fancy models like those from Garmin, but those usually cost way above $1,000, and outside of diving, those are of course pretty mediocre smartwatches. So if the Apple Watch is way cheaper than a Garmin, but does pretty much all the things that most divers need, while also being, you know, a decent smartwatch, then that's a huge deal that I'd be really jealous about as an Android user. If only Apple had a foldable, I'd actually be super tempted to switch right now. But anyway, let me know down in the comments or over at Twitter what you thought about all the Apple announcements, whether you're excited about any of them, whether you want to get any of them and why. And also, if you haven't seen my video on how Apple is moving to become a major ad player competing with Google and Facebook, that should be somewhere here down in the description. Somewhere, check it out. I think you'll like it. Thank you very much for watching. Happy Friday. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you next Friday.